"This is my house now, Uncle," my nephew Mark declared, waving a forged will in my face the day after my sister's funeral. Mom left it to me. Instead of arguing, I simply nodded and moved into the guest room. For a month, I watched him live like a king in my home, treating me like a servant. He thought he had won. He didn't know he was just a tenant on a very short lease, and the real owner was about to come back to collect the rent. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. My quiet acceptance, my meek retreat to the guest room. It was not an act of weakness. It was the beginning of a promise kept. To understand why I allowed my own nephew to become the arrogant king of my castle, you must understand the final desperate wish of his mother, my dear sister, Sarah. I sat with her through the last weeks of her illness, in a sterile hospital, room that smelled of antiseptic and regret. The vibrant, laughing woman I had grown up with was now a fragile shadow, her body failing but her mind still sharp and filled with a mother's deepest sorrow, the failure to raise a good man. "He's a black hole, Daniel," she had whispered to me one night, her voice a dry rustle of paper, her gaze fixed on a photograph of a smiling teenage Mark. A void of entitlement. I gave him everything, and in doing so I gave him nothing of value. "It's not your fault, Sarah," I had said, holding her frail hand. "You loved him." "Love," she scoffed, a flicker of her old fire returning. "I smothered him with love. I protected him from every consequence, and now he is a man who believes that consequences are for other people. He only understands money, Daniel. He sees the world, and everyone in it, as a resource to be exploited." Her words were a painful echo of my own observations. I remembered the countless times I had quietly lent her money to cover Mark's debts or failed business ventures. I remembered the stories of his arrogance, his laziness, his casual cruelty to those he deemed beneath him. "He will come to you when I'm gone," she had continued, her eyes locking onto mine with a desperate final plea. "He will believe this house, your house, is his birthright. He will try to take it. Don't fight him, Daniel. Not at first." I had looked at her, confused. "Not fight him?" "Sarah, he can't." "Promise me," she insisted, her grip surprisingly strong. "Don't just defeat him, teach him. Give him the one thing I never could, a real-world lesson in humility and consequence. Let him believe he has won. Let him live in his fantasy. Give him enough rope, and let his own greed be the thing that hangs him. Promise me you will teach him a lesson he will never forget, so that he might one day become a man worthy of the memory of the mother who loved him too much." I promised. It was the last conversation of any substance we ever had, and when Mark appeared on my doorstep, his grief a transparently thin veneer over his avaricious glee, waving a forged will that was as clumsy as it was insulting, I saw not an enemy to be vanquished, but a final, difficult lesson plan to be executed. My classroom would be my own home, so I played my part. I became the doddering, grief-stricken old uncle, too weary to fight, too trusting to question. I packed a small bag and moved into the small guest room at the back of the house. The room once reserved for visiting friends, and now my own quiet prison cell. But there was another secret at play, a piece of history that made my passive resistance not just an emotional choice, but a brilliant strategic one: the house itself. This house, this beautiful, sprawling Victorian home with its wraparound porch and towering oak trees, was not, in the strictest legal sense, mine. Its story was a quiet testament to a different kind of inheritance, one of loyalty and trust. It belonged, on paper, to the Rossi family, a family of Italian immigrants who had been my parents' dearest friends. The Rossis had built this house with their own hands, but had fallen on hard times decades ago and were forced to return to Italy. They couldn't bear to sell their dream home. I remember the day Mr. Rossi, a man with hands like gnarled oak and a heart just as strong, came to me. I was a young man then, just starting my career as an archivist. "Daniel," he had said, his voice thick with emotion, "I cannot sell this house. It is the heart of my family, but I cannot keep it. I need someone to be its guardian, its caretaker, someone who understands history, who understands that the value of a house is not in its price, but in the life lived within its walls. I want you to live here, be its keeper, until the day my family can return." We had drawn up a simple ironclad legal agreement. It was not a lease. It was a lifetime custodianship. I would live in the house, maintain it, and protect it as my own for as long as I lived. The Rossi family would pay the property taxes from a trust they had established. The house could not be sold, could not be transferred, could not be inherited. It was, and always would be, the property of the Rossi estate, held in trust for their future generations. My sister Sarah knew this story, and Mark, in his greedy haste, had either forgotten it or more likely had chosen to believe it was a sentimental family myth that would never stand up in a court of law against his forged document. So, the moment Mark moved in, after I had settled, into my small guest room, I made a phone call. It was to a number in Florence, Italy. "Isabella?" I had asked. "Uncle Daniel," a warm, vibrant voice answered. It was Isabella Rossi, the daughter of my old friend, now a formidable and highly successful international lawyer in her own right. "It has been too long. How are you?" "I am well, my dear," I said, "but the time has come. Your family's house needs its owner, and I have a story to tell you, and a plan that I believe you, as both a lawyer and a student of poetic justice, will find fascinating." Mark's reign as the self-proclaimed lord of the manor began immediately, and it was as vulgar as it was predictable. He and his equally vacuous girlfriend, Tiffany, moved in, their cheap, modern furniture clashing horribly with the house's historic character. The quiet, book-filled home that had been a sanctuary of history was transformed overnight into a den of cheap thrills and loud parties. They treated me not as a relative, not even as a tenant, but as a piece of the old furniture they hadn't yet gotten around to throwing out. I became their invisible, unpaid servant. "Uncle Dan," Tiffany would call from the living room where she was sprawled on the sofa, scrolling through her phone. "The remote is all the way over there. Could you be a dear and get it for me?" "Daniel," Mark would say, tossing me his car keys without even looking at me. "My car is filthy. Take it to the detailer's, will you? And pick up my dry cleaning on the way back." Each request, each casual act of disrespect was a small, sharp twist of the knife. But I held my promise to Sarah. I did not protest. I simply obeyed, my face a mask of benign, slightly doddering compliance. I became the perfect embodiment of the harmless old uncle they believed me to be. "Yes, dear," I would say to Tiffany. "Of course, Mark," I would reply, but they, in their arrogance, made a critical mistake. They mistook my silence for stupidity. They mistook my compliance for weakness. They saw an archivist, a librarian, as a man who simply filed things away. They had no idea that the true skill of an archivist is not just filing, but observing, cataloging, and understanding the hidden connections between seemingly disparate pieces of information. And I was archiving every single one of their transgressions. While I was playing the part of the meek, forgetful old man by day, I was a meticulous intelligence agent by night. My small guest room became my secret headquarters. Every receipt they carelessly tossed in the trash, I retrieved and documented. Every overdue bill that arrived in the mail, I photographed. Every boastful post they made on social media, showcasing their lavish new lifestyle funded by credit, I screenshotted and saved to a secure file. They were creating a perfect, self-incriminating, historical record, and they didn't even know it. The centerpiece of their self-destruction was their belief that they owned a valuable, sellable asset. This belief, which I carefully nurtured, was the cornerstone of my plan. I knew that giving a man like Mark the illusion of wealth was like giving a pyromaniac a can of gasoline and a book of matches. I would play my part, accidentally, leaving old, outdated property assessments on the kitchen table, documents that suggested the house was worth a fortune. "Oh dear," I would say when Mark discovered them. "Is that still here? That's from the market peak years ago. It's probably not worth that much now." "Don't you worry about it, Uncle," he would say, a greedy glint in his eye as he pocketed the document. "I know how to handle these things." He began to spend money he didn't have with a reckless abandon. He leased a new luxury sports car. He bought Tiffany a gaudy diamond bracelet. He threw lavish, noisy parties for his equally shallow friends, parties that often left the historic home damaged and dirty. I would say nothing. I would just quietly clean up the mess the next morning, my heart aching for the disrespect shown to this house I had promised to protect. Each broken glass, each wine stain on the antique rug was another piece of evidence for my growing file. I maintained my regular calls with Isabella Rossi in Italy. I updated her on the situation, on the mounting debts and the escalating arrogance of my nephew. "He is treating your family's home like a cheap hotel, my dear," I told her one evening. "Let him," her voice was calm, a lawyer's voice, "let him accumulate the debt. Let him believe the fantasy. The deeper he digs his hole, the harder it will be for him to crawl out." "Has he mentioned selling it yet?" "Not yet," I replied, "but he will. His credit is being stretched to its absolute limit. It is only a matter of time." The call came, as I knew it would, about 3 weeks into his occupation. He summoned me to the living room, the room he now called his living room. He was sitting in my old armchair, his feet propped up on a priceless 19th century ottoman, a picture of unearned authority. "Uncle Dan," he began, his tone a poor imitation of a serious businessman, "we need to talk about the future of this property. It's a great asset, but it's old. It's illiquid. Tiffany and we're thinking of selling, moving to a more modern place. A penthouse downtown, perhaps. We could use the capital to fund some of my investment ideas." I played my part, my face a mask of confused, sentimental attachment. "Sell?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. But this house has been in our family for so long. Your mother, she loved this house." "Mom was a sentimentalist, like you," he said with a dismissive wave. "This is the 21st century. Assets are meant to be leveraged, not gathering dust. Don't worry," he added, a condescending smirk on his face. "We'll make sure you have a nice, clean room in a very comfortable retirement community." He thought he was offering me a kindness. He was, in fact, handing me the final crucial piece of my plan. "Well," I said with a sigh of resignation, "if you think it's for the best, you're the man of the house now after all." His chest puffed out with pride. He had won. The doddering old man had finally been convinced. The moment Mark announced his intention to sell, I initiated the next phase of the plan with Isabella. The pyromaniac had the gasoline. It was time for us to provide the match. Our goal was not just to expose him, but to make him an active, willing participant in his own public humiliation. We would not just present him with the truth. We would make him sign a contract that legally bound him to it. Our first step was to create a fictional buyer. Isabella, with her extensive legal and financial connections in Europe, was a master of creating such illusions. She established a shell corporation in Liechtenstein, a country known for its impenetrable corporate privacy laws. She called it Legacy Holdings Group, a name chosen for its exquisite, biting irony. The next step was to find a frontman, an actor to play the role of the eager real estate investor. Isabella found the perfect candidate, a retired British stage actor named Alistair Finch, a man with a Shakespearean flair for performance and a deep personal debt to the Rossi family. He was a man who understood the art of the long game and relished the idea of playing a role in this drama of poetic justice. While Isabella was setting the international stage, my role was to be the local stagehand, subtly guiding my nephew towards the trap. A few days after our talk, I approached him, my face a mask of worried, helpful concern. "Mark," I said, my voice a doddering whisper. "I was thinking about what you said, about selling the house. If you're serious, I might know a person, an old colleague from my archiving days. He now works as a private broker for very wealthy, very discreet international clients." Mark's eyes lit up, the greedy glint returning. "International clients? Are they cash buyers?" "Oh, I believe so," I replied innocently. "They look for unique properties with historical significance. They pay a premium for privacy. I had planted the seed. The idea of a private off-market deal with a mysterious wealthy foreigner was infinitely more appealing to his ego than a standard real estate listing. It made him feel like a major player. I gave him a burner phone number, a number that led directly to our actor Alistair Finch in a London hotel room. The performance began. Mark, puffed up with his own self-importance, made the call. Alistair, playing the part of the sophisticated, slightly eccentric investor's broker, was brilliant. He was dismissive at first, then intrigued, then finally hooked. He spoke of his client's desire for a piece of authentic American history and lamented how difficult it was to find properties that hadn't been ruined by modern renovations. He was, of course, describing the very house Mark was so desperate to gut and modernize. They began a week-long negotiation, a carefully choreographed dance designed to inflate Mark's ego and his desperation in equal measure. Alistair would make an outrageous offer, then threaten to walk away, only to be lured back by Mark's increasingly frantic promises. All the while, I was in the background, playing the part of the helpful, slightly confused uncle. "I don't know, Mark," I would say, shaking my head as I reviewed the fictional offer letters. "This seems too good to be true. Are you sure this Mr. Finch is legitimate?" "Of course he is," Mark would snap, his patience wearing thin. "You don't understand modern finance, Uncle. This is how the big deals are done. Just stay out of it. I'm handling it." He was so eager to prove me wrong, to show the old man how a real businessman operated, that he ignored every red flag, every instinct that a more prudent person would have heeded. His arrogance had become my greatest ally. Finally, they agreed on a price, an absurdly, fantastically high price, a number chosen to make Mark feel like he had just conquered Wall Street. The final part of the trap was the contract. Isabella herself drafted the document. It was a masterpiece of legal deception. On the surface, it was a standard real estate purchase agreement, but woven into the dense, technical jargon were two crucial time-activated clauses. The first clause stated that a non-refundable deposit of $100,000 would be transferred to Mark upon signing. This was the bait. It was real money, designed to make him feel the victory was tangible, to make him spend and accumulate even more debt in anticipation of the final payout. The second clause, the real heart of the trap, was the historical provenance clause. It stated that the final sale was contingent upon the seller, Mark, providing absolute, undisputed proof of legal ownership and title, free of all liens and encumbrances, within 30 days of signing. If he failed to do so, the contract would be rendered null and void. Furthermore, he would be legally liable for the immediate return of the $100,000 deposit, plus a significant penalty for contractual breach and attempted fraud. It was a legal time bomb, and he was about to sign the document that would start the countdown. Alistair Finch flew in to sign the papers. He arrived at the house in a chauffeured car, looking every inch the part of a high-powered broker. He and Mark sat at the dining room table, the table I had eaten at for 40 years, and they signed the contract. I watched from the doorway, a silent, invisible witness. The moment the ink was dry, Alistair's phone rang. "Ah," he said with a sigh. "The client. He wants to fly in to see the property himself before the final closing. He is a great admirer of history. In fact, he is bringing his own historian with him, a Dr. Isabella Rossi. Perhaps you've heard of her?" Mark, of course, had not. Fine, he said impatiently, his eyes already on the wire transfer confirmation for the deposit that had just hit his phone. "Bring whoever you want. Just make sure the final payment is on time." The stage was set. The deposit was paid. The contract was signed. The clock was ticking. And the real owner, with her team of lawyers, was on her way back home. The $100,000 deposit hit Mark's bank account like a shot of pure adrenaline. It was, to him, tangible proof of his own genius. It was the validation he had craved his entire life, a clear signal that he had finally surpassed his sentimental, doddering old uncle. The 30-day closing period was not, in his mind, a deadline to provide legal documents he didn't possess. It was a 30-day victory lap. His transformation from a mere usurper into a grotesque caricature of a feudal lord was immediate and absolute. The quiet, historic home of the Rossi family was turned into a non-stop party venue. Cars I didn't recognize were constantly parked in the driveway. Loud, thumping music, the kind that rattles the very foundations of a well-built house, would pulse late into the night. He and Tiffany hosted an endless parade of their equally shallow friends, showing off their new house, boasting about the brilliant real estate deal they had just closed. My role in this new regime shifted from that of a tolerated piece of old furniture to that of an actively despised servant. My quiet compliance was no longer just accepted, it was expected. My presence was an irritating reminder of a past he was trying to erase, and he took every opportunity to humiliate me, to solidify his new status as the man of the house. The verbal jabs became more frequent, more cruel, often delivered in front of his friends for maximum effect. "Uncle Dan still thinks you're supposed to wax a hardwood floor," he'd say with a loud, braying laugh as I quietly cleaned up a wine spill. "Can you believe it? The man's a living fossil. He sent me on increasingly demeaning errands. I was dispatched to pick up his laundry, to wait in line for the latest trendy pastry, to return Tiffany's endless stream of online shopping mistakes. Each time I would simply nod, my face a mask of benign vacancy, and I would go. I would perform the task with a quiet, efficient dignity. My calm compliance seemed to infuriate him more than any argument could have. He wanted me to break. He wanted me to fight back, to give him a reason to finally, physically throw me out. But I would not give him the satisfaction. I was playing a longer, more patient game. Every act of his arrogance was another line item in the final audit of his character. The most painful part was watching what he was doing to the house itself. This was not my house, but I was its custodian. I had made a promise to Mr. Rossi, a promise to be its guardian, and Mark was committing acts of historical vandalism. He took down the antique, hand-carved mantelpiece in the living room, replacing it with a hideous, minimalist slab of black granite. He painted over the beautiful, hand-stenciled wallpaper in the dining room with a garish, glossy shade of gray. The final, unforgivable act, the one that tested my resolve to its absolute limit, concerned the garden. The beautiful, sprawling rose. Garden that Mrs. Rossi had planted with her own hands, the garden I had lovingly tended for over 40 years as part of my promise. I came out one morning to find Mark and a team of landscapers standing in the middle of it. "What's going on here?" I asked, my voice trembling for the first time. Mark turned to me, a smug, triumphant look on his face. "Progress, Uncle," he said. "We're tearing out these old, overgrown weeds, putting in a hot tub and a fire pit. This is prime entertaining space. Nobody cares about a bunch of old flowers. Not just flowers. They were a living legacy, a testament to a woman's love for her home, I looked at the rose bushes, the same ones Mrs. Rossi had taught me how to prune, and I felt a surge of white-hot rage, so intense it almost brought me to my knees. I wanted to scream, I wanted to rage, I wanted to tell him the truth, right there, and then. But then I remembered my promise to Sarah. Let his own greed be the thing that hangs him. This act of desecration was not just an insult to the Rossi family. It was a crucial piece of evidence. It was the ultimate proof of his unfitness, his utter lack of respect for history, for legacy, for anything beyond his own fleeting desires. So I swallowed my rage. I turned, and without another word, I walked back into the house. I could hear the sound of the first rose bush being ripped from the earth, and it felt like a part of my own soul was being torn out with it. That evening, I took a photograph of the devastated garden and emailed it, along with a brief factual report to Isabella Rossi. Her reply was swift and cold as ice. Thank you for the update, Daniel. The evidence file is now complete. Please confirm the date of the closing party. It was to be Mark's grand finale, a house-selling party to celebrate his triumph before the new owner took possession. He was planning it for the 29th day of the 30-day closing period. The timing was perfect. It was the night before the deadline on his fraudulent contract expired. It would be the night that Isabella, the historian accompanying the client, would finally arrive. It would be the night the real owner came home. Mark's belief in his own impending wealth was so absolute, so unshakable, that he began to behave not just like a rich man, but like a man for whom money was an abstract concept with no consequences. The $100,000 deposit, which should have been a secure guarantee for his fraudulent contract, became his personal slush fund. He was spending it with a speed that was breathtakingly stupid, a final, magnificent act of financial self-immolation. He bought Tiffany a ludicrously expensive sports car, a bright yellow monstrosity that looked utterly alien parked in the driveway of the old Victorian house. He bought himself a new wardrobe of designer clothes, throwing his old ones in the trash. He spoke loudly on the phone to stockbrokers, making bold investments in high-risk ventures, convinced he was a financial guru. I watched and I documented. Every credit card receipt I found, every new purchase that arrived at the house was another page in the growing file I was compiling for Isabella. His final fatal mistake was the party itself. He was determined to make it the most extravagant, talked about event of the year. It was not just a celebration, it was his coronation, his public ascension into the world of the wealthy elite he so desperately admired. He spared no expense. He hired the city's most famous caterer, a bartender who specialized in flaming cocktails, and a DJ whose sound system shook the very windows of the house. He was paying for it all, of course, with the last of the deposit money, supremely confident that the multi-million-dollar payout was just days away. He presented me with an invitation, a garish gold-embossed card. "Here you go, Uncle," he said, tossing it on the kitchen table. "My house-selling party. Be there. Tiffany thinks it would be a nice touch if you help the caterers a bit, you know, since you'll be leaving soon anyway." A final farewell. He was not just inviting me to his party. He was casting me one last time in the role of the servant. He wanted his friends to see him giving orders to the old man he had displaced. It was a final petty act of dominance. "I wouldn't miss it for the world, Mark," I replied, my voice a perfect imitation of weary resignation. Meanwhile, my own preparations were proceeding with a quiet, deadly precision. I was in constant contact with Isabella. We were no longer just planning a legal confrontation. We were choreographing a piece of theater. "The timing must be perfect, Daniel," she had instructed me over a secure video call, her lawyer's mind dissecting every detail. "We will not arrive at the beginning. We let him have his moment. We let him give his speech, boast to his friends, drink his champagne. We must allow him to climb to the very peak of his own arrogance. The fall will be that much greater. We..." finalized the cast of characters. Isabella would arrive first, in her role as the historian and appraiser. She would be accompanied by Alistair Finch, our actor, still playing the part of the broker. A few minutes later, two men who would introduce themselves as her legal team would arrive. And finally, the investor himself, the mysterious head of Legacy Holdings Group, would make his entrance. The role of the investor was to be played by a man named Mr. Lorenzo Rossi, Isabella's uncle, a formidable silver-haired man who was the patriarch of the Rossi family and a man who took promises and family honor very seriously. The thought of what Mark had done to his family's home, the home he had been born in, had filled him with a cold, righteous anger. He was not just an actor in our play, he was a man coming to reclaim his own history. My role was simple, yet crucial. I was to be the invisible observer, the archivist. I had installed a series of small, discreet security cameras throughout the main party area, devices that looked like smoke detectors and power adapters. I would be in my small guest room watching the entire event unfold on a monitor, feeding real-time information to Isabella and her team, who would be waiting in a car just down the street. Mark is about to give his speech, I would report. The guests are all gathered in the living room. It is the perfect moment. The final piece of the plan was the most beautifully ironic. A week before the party, Mark came to me, a look of frustration on his face. "This is ridiculous," he grumbled. "The title company for the buyer, they're being incredibly difficult. They keep asking for old documents, deeds, proof of ownership going back 50 years, stuff I don't have. Can you believe the bureaucracy?" "Old. Houses have complicated histories, Mark," I said, feigning sympathy. "Well, can you help?" he asked, his voice laced with annoyance. "You've been here forever. You must have a box of that old junk somewhere." I led him to the attic. There, in a dusty corner, was a large, leather-bound trunk. It was the original Rossi family trunk, containing all of the house's historical documents. The original deed, the blueprints, the letters, the photographs, the absolute, irrefutable proof of ownership. "Here it is," I said. "Everything you need should be in here. The key, well, I seem to have misplaced it years ago, but I'm sure a man as clever as you can find a way to open it." I left him there, struggling with the lock of a trunk that contained the very evidence that would destroy him. He thought he was working to secure his fortune. In reality, I had just made him the willing, eager curator of his own public execution. The day of the party, the 29th day, arrived. The house was a whirlwind of frantic, last-minute preparations. Florists, caterers, and bartenders swarmed the property, all under the imperious direction of Mark and Tiffany. They were giddy, electric with the thrill of their impending victory. They treated the day not just as a celebration, but as a coronation. I remained in my guest room, a quiet, forgotten figure in the midst of the chaos. My own preparations were of a different kind. I calibrated the cameras, checked the audio feeds, and had a final brief conference call with Isabella and her team. "Everyone is in position, Daniel," she confirmed from their waiting car. "Mr. Finch is ready. My uncle is very much looking forward to his entrance. We will move on your signal." "The signal will be given the moment he finishes his speech," I replied. "Let him have his final moment of glory. Let him build his own pedestal as high as possible. It is a principle of history. The higher the monument to arrogance, the more satisfying the ruins." As evening fell, the guests began to arrive. It was a loud, garish affair, a crowd of people who valued volume over substance. They marveled at the house, at the expensive champagne, at the sheer, unapologetic display of wealth. Mark and Tiffany were in their element, soaking in the admiration, the envy. As promised, Mark found me as I was quietly helping a caterer clear some glasses. He clapped a hand on my shoulder, a gesture that was less affection and more ownership. "Having fun, Uncle?" he asked, his voice loud enough for his nearby friends to hear. Don't work too hard. It's a party. His friend snickered. I simply nodded and continued my work, my face a mask of humble compliance. Finally, the moment came. Mark stood on the newly constructed deck overlooking the ruined rose garden, a microphone in his hand. The DJ silenced the throbbing music. A spotlight, which he had rented for the occasion, illuminated him against the night sky. "Friends, welcome," he began, his voice booming with a practiced, false sincerity. "Welcome to my home, and welcome to the celebration of a new beginning." He spoke for 10 minutes, a long, rambling ode to himself. He spoke of vision, of seeing potential where others saw only the past. He spoke of making hard decisions and honoring his family's legacy by moving it into the 21st century. It was a masterpiece of self-congratulation, each word a testament to his own breathtaking narcissism. He then gestured vaguely in my direction, where I stood in the shadows by the service door. "And I want to thank my uncle, Daniel," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "For his years of caretaking, he has looked after this old house, and now he can finally enjoy a well-deserved peaceful retirement, knowing that the family legacy is in stronger, more capable hands." It was the final public dismissal, the final insult. He had not just taken the house, he was now taking credit for its very history, erasing my 40 years of guardianship with a single arrogant sentence. He raised his glass. "So let us toast," he declared. "To the future, to progress, and to a successful sale." The crowd roared its approval, a chorus of sycophants celebrating a victory they did not understand. As they drank, I reached for my phone. My thumb hovered over the single button that would bring this entire charade crashing down. I looked at Mark, standing there in the spotlight, bathed in the glow of his own ego, a temporary king on a throne of lies. I thought of my sister, Sarah, and the promise I had made to her. Let his own greed be the thing that hangs him. I pressed the button. A single text message was sent to Isabella's phone. It contained only one word: "Now." Down the street, the doors of a dark, waiting limousine opened. The real owner and her entourage of lawyers and actors were on their way. The final act of the play, the one my nephew had no idea he was the star of, was about to begin. The house lights were about to come up, and the audience was about to see the truth. Just as Mark was taking a triumphant sip of his champagne, the grand front door of the house swung open. All heads turned. Framed in the doorway, silhouetted against the night, stood a figure of such elegance and authority that a hush instantly fell over the boisterous party. It was Isabella Rossi. She was dressed in a simple but exquisitely tailored black suit, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a severe chignon. She radiated a power that was not loud or flashy, but deep, ancient, and absolute. Beside her stood Alistair Finch, our actor, looking every inch the part of a distinguished British broker. They did not speak. They simply walked into the room, their slow, deliberate steps a stark contrast to the frantic energy of the party. The crowd parted before them, an invisible force field of consequence pushing them aside. Mark, his face a mixture of confusion and annoyance at having his spotlight stolen, strode forward. "Alistair, you're early. The final walkthrough isn't until tomorrow." He then turned to Isabella, his eyes running over her with a dismissive, appraising glance. "And you must be the historian, Dr. Rossi. Welcome. As you can see," he said with a grand, sweeping gesture, "we've been celebrating the successful transaction." Isabella did not smile. She looked at Mark, her gaze as cold and sharp as a shard of ice. Then her eyes swept across the room, taking in the garish decorations, the minimalist furniture, the desecrated garden visible through the patio doors. A look of profound, controlled disgust flickered across her features. "A transaction has indeed taken place, Mr. Mark," she said, her voice a low, melodic contralto with a faint musical Italian accent. "But I fear you have misunderstood its nature." Before Mark could reply, Alistair Finch stepped forward, a document in his hand. It was the purchase agreement. "Mark, my dear fellow," he began, his voice no longer the friendly tone of a business partner, but the booming, theatrical pronouncement of a Shakespearean actor on a stage. "It has come to our attention, the attention of my client, Legacy Holdings Group, that there appears to be a significant discrepancy regarding this contract." "A discrepancy?" Mark blustered, his confidence beginning to waver. "The contract is ironclad. The deposit has been paid." "Ah, yes. The deposit," Alistair said with a theatrical sigh. He then turned to address the captivated audience of party guests. "It appears," he announced, "that my client was under the impression that they were purchasing this historic home from its legal and rightful owner. However, a final title search, completed just this afternoon, has revealed a most curious fact." He paused, letting the suspense build. "It seems," he continued, "that the gentleman who signed this contract as the seller has, in fact, no legal right to sell this property whatsoever." A collective gasp went through the room. Mark's face went white. That's a lie. My mother's will. It's all there." "Your mother's will," Isabella's voice cut through the air like a razor, "is an interesting piece of fiction, but it is legally irrelevant. Your mother could not bequeath to you that which she did not own." She took a step forward, her presence dominating the room. "My name," she said, her voice now ringing with a power that left no room for doubt, "is Isabella Rossi, and this," she gestured to the house around them, "is my family's home. It has been for 3 generations. And you, sir, are a trespasser." She produced a slim leather portfolio. It was the original Rossi family trunk, the one I had left for Mark in the attic, but it was no longer locked. It was open. The historical documents you were so kind enough to find for my broker, she said with a small, cold smile, have proven most illuminating. They contain the original deed, signed by my grandfather. They contain the lifetime custodianship agreement, signed by your Uncle Daniel. And they contain absolutely no mention of your mother or of you. The trap had been sprung. It was a beautiful public demolition. He was not just a failed businessman. He was a common fraud, a squatter, exposed in front of the very society he had been so desperate to impress. The foundation of his entire fantasy had just been ripped out from under him. He stood there, speechless, his face a crumbling ruin of shock and humiliation. Mark stared at Isabella, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. The forged will, the foundation of his entire arrogant enterprise, had been dismissed as a piece of fiction. The house he had been calling his own for a month was revealed to be a stage upon which he was merely a trespassing fool. His world was shrinking, the walls of reality closing in on him with a terrifying speed. This is a mistake," he finally stammered, his eyes darting around the room, searching for an ally, a friendly face, but finding only a sea of cold, judgmental stares. "My uncle, Daniel, where is he? He'll sort this out. He knows this is my house." "Yes," a new voice said, a deep, powerful baritone that commanded immediate attention. "Let us speak to Daniel." The crowd parted once more. 2 men impeccably, dressed in dark suits, who had entered unnoticed during the commotion, now stepped forward. They flanked a 3rd man, an elderly silver-haired gentleman who walked with the aid of a simple, elegant cane. He was not a flashy man, but he radiated an aura of immense, old-world power. It was Lorenzo Rossi, Isabella's uncle, the patriarch of the Rossi family, the true investor. He stopped in front of Mark, his dark, piercing eyes examining my nephew, not with anger, but with the cold, dispassionate curiosity of a biologist studying an insect. "So," Lorenzo said, his voice a low, rumbling sound. "You are the boy who has been sleeping in my father's bed. You are the one who ripped out my mother's roses to build what was it? A fire pit?" Mark shrank back, utterly intimidated. "And you?" Lorenzo continued, his gaze now falling on Alistair Finch. "You are the broker who signed a fraudulent contract with this child." "Indeed, Mr. Rossi," Alistair said, stepping back into his role, a sheaf of papers now in his hand. "And according to the terms of that very contract, which Mr. Mark here signed with such enthusiasm, his failure to provide legal title within 30 days constitutes a material breach." He turned to Mark, his voice now booming with theatrical finality. "As such, you are legally obligated to immediately return the $100,000 deposit in full. Furthermore, as per Clause 17B, you are also liable for a contractual breach penalty of an additional $100,000 plus all associated legal fees." If Isabella's revelation had been a hammer blow, this was the final crushing weight that flattened Mark completely. He hadn't just failed to gain a fortune. He had, in the space of 30 days, accrued a personal debt of over $200,000. The money he had so lavishly spent on cars, on parties, on Tiffany's jewelry, was now a millstone that would drag him to the bottom. He looked at Tiffany, his eyes pleading. She, in a moment of stunning reptilian self-preservation, simply took the diamond bracelet he had bought her from her wrist, placed it on a nearby table, and walked out of the house. And his life, without a word. It was in this moment of absolute, public ruin that I finally made my entrance. I walked slowly from my guest room, no longer the doddering, invisible uncle, but the quiet, patient architect of this entire beautiful demolition. I was not smiling. My face was a mask of grave, sorrowful judgment. I walked past Mark, who was now just a whimpering, broken shell of a man, and stood before Mr. Lorenzo Rossi. "Lorenzo," I said quietly, clasping his hand, "thank you for coming. I am so sorry for what has been done to your family's home." "It is not you who should be sorry, my old friend," he replied, his voice softening with a genuine warmth. "You have been its faithful guardian. You have honored your promise. And you," he added, a wry smile touching his lips, "have taught a most effective lesson in family history." I then turned to my nephew. He was slumped in a chair, his head in his hands, a man who had lost everything in a single evening. I did not feel triumph. I did not feel anger. I felt only a profound, echoing sadness for my sister, Sarah. I looked at the portrait of her on the wall, the one Mark had relegated to a dark corner of the hallway. "Sarah," I said, my voice just loud enough for the remaining silent witnesses to hear. "I have kept my promise. He has learned his lesson. Perhaps now he can finally begin to learn how to be a man." I did not offer him money. I did not offer him a place to stay. I offered him only the cold, hard truth of his consequences. The foundation of his life, built on lies and entitlement, had been utterly destroyed. Now, if he was to have a future, at all, he would have to build it himself, from the ground up, with nothing but the bitter, invaluable lesson he had just been taught. The lesson was my final, painful gift to him. It was my inheritance. The party ended, not with a bang, but with the quiet, efficient work of Isabella Rossi's legal team. The remaining guests, the ones who had stayed to witness the entire brutal spectacle, were politely but firmly escorted out. Mark was served, with a stack of legal documents that detailed his immense, newly acquired debt and a restraining order preventing him from setting foot on the Rossi property ever again. He was a king one moment, and a homeless, indebted trespasser the next. He left the house that night with nothing but the clothes on his back, his face a hollow mask of shock. The flashy sports car, the last vestige of his fantasy life, was repossessed from the driveway the very next morning. He had flown too close to the sun on wings of borrowed money, and now he had crashed back down to an earth that was harder and colder than he had ever imagined. In the days that followed, the Rossi family, with a quiet, dignified grace, reclaimed their home. Lorenzo and Isabella walked through the rooms, their hands tracing the lines of the furniture, their voices low as they shared memories of a time before my guardianship. They surveyed the damage Mark had done, the garish gray paint, the ruined garden, not with anger, but with a sad resolve. A house, like a family, can be wounded, Lorenzo said to me, as we stood looking at the barren patch of earth where his mother's roses had once bloomed. But a strong foundation can always be rebuilt. Isabella, in her capacity as a lawyer, was ruthless in pursuing the debt Mark owed. His bank accounts were frozen, his assets seized. He was, in every legal and financial sense of the word, ruined. But it was her next action that surprised me. She came to me a week later with a proposition. "My uncle and I have been discussing your nephew, Daniel," she said, her tone professional but with an undercurrent of something else, compassion, perhaps. "He is a fool and a fraud, but he is still your sister's son. My family owes you a debt that can never be repaid. You were the guardian of our home. We would like to offer you the chance to be the guardian of his future." The proposition was this. The Rossi family would agree to forgive Mark's entire $200,000 debt, to wipe his slate clean on one condition. He had to accept a position, a real job, working for one of their family's more remote businesses. A vineyard and olive grove in the Italian countryside. It was not a management position. It was a laborer's position. He would work the soil, prune the vines, and live in a simple cottage on the property. He would earn an honest wage for honest work. "It is a choice," Isabella explained. "He can face the courts and the debt collectors here, a path that will likely lead to bankruptcy and ruin. Or he can accept this, a chance to build a life, a real life, from the ground up. The choice is his. But we felt, out of respect for you and your sister, that the choice should be offered. It was an act of incredible, unexpected grace. It was a perfect, historical justice. They were not just punishing him. They were offering him a path to redemption, the very thing my sister Sarah had so desperately wished for. I was the one who presented the offer to Mark. I found him living in a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city, a shadow of his former self. I laid out the two paths before him. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something other than arrogance in his eyes. It was fear, yes, but it was also a glimmer of understanding. The boy who had only ever known the easy way was now facing the consequences of that life, and he was terrified. He took the offer. A month later, I drove him to the airport. We barely spoke. As he was about to go through security, he turned to me. "Why?" he asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "After everything I did, why are you helping me?" I thought of my sister, of her final, tearful plea. "Because my promise to your mother was not to destroy you, Mark," I said. "It was to teach you. Your lesson is just beginning. Don't waste it. I do not know if he will succeed. I do not know if a man can truly be remade, but I know that I kept my promise. I had given him his one, last chance. As for me, my own story found its quiet final chapter. Isabella and Lorenzo insisted that I continue my custodianship of the house, that it was my home for as long as I lived, but I politely declined. "My work here is done," I told them. "This house needs its family back. It needs the sounds of Rossi children running through its halls again." I moved into a small, bright apartment in the city, a place filled not with the ghosts of the past, but with the quiet promise of my own future. My days are simple. I read, I write, I volunteer at the city archives, helping a new generation connect with the stories of the past. Sometimes I receive a postcard from Italy. There are no words, just a simple picture. A vineyard under a Tuscan sun. A gnarled, ancient olive tree. It is not an apology. It is not a thank you. It is, I hope, a report. A quiet signal from a man who is, perhaps, finally learning the difference between owning a house and building a home. History, I have learned, is not just the story of great battles and fallen empires. It is the quiet, patient story of a single seed being planted in barren soil and the long, hopeful wait for it to grow. If this story of promises kept and second chances has found a place in your heart, please show your support by liking and sharing this video. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories where justice is not just about punishment, but about the hope of redemption. Thank you for watching.